If you're looking for a new way to support the podcast, check out Dubby.gg, an energy supplement company trying to make a difference. There you can use code SIDEMISSION for 10% off your order. Thank you to Dubby for sponsoring this episode, and we hope you enjoy.
Welcome in to the newest episode of Side Mission. I, like always, am your host, Rusty Ellis, joined by just one of the boys, Kyle Lynch. And Kyle, today we are talking about a game that I think surprised us both with how much we enjoyed it. We are talking about Warhammer 40,000 Space Marines 2. Kyle, just so everybody knows, neither of us have played a Warhammer game. So we have no idea of the pre-existing lore or anything going into this game. But it's safe to say, Kyle, and I think me and you both felt this way, this is a really good starting point if you are wanting to get into the Warhammer games, because you don't really have to have prior knowledge to be able to enjoy this one. And I think that as a game that we both enjoyed quite a bit, I think that's a real strength of this game.
Yeah, I agree. I have no idea, anything about the lore of this. I know that it's very popular and that it's very, very in-depth. But playing this game, I said multiple times to both Matt and Rusty that I kind of feel bad that I missed out on the first game, because if it was anything like this, I absolutely would have loved it. But Space Marine 2 absolutely surprised us, because I think that we both went into this game, expecting it to be good and just kind of, all right, we'll play this game for a little while. I did not expect to pretty much fall in love with this game, especially because of the combat. The combat is incredible, and the co-op, seamless. We had no problems with the co-op, and I think that allowing you to play with two other people, it's great. It's a lot of fun. It's a lot of just crazy fucking carnage and gore, but it's a damn good time. And I also don't recall running into a lot of, graphical issues or, frame drops. Obviously, the network was good because, we played co-op pretty consistently every time we played this game. But yeah, I love it.
Yeah, I'm with you in that, there's not a lot of technical issues, and that's a good thing. We've talked a lot about how it seems like nowadays, more often than not, games come out and there are typically at least a couple issues. I think I had a few minor issues. I think the game crashed on me one time. But since the game came out, for that to be the only real issue that either of us has run into, I think that says a lot about just the top-notch quality of this game. It really is on a technical level. It looks good, it runs well, and it's clear that the servers were prioritized for co-op because, again, we spent most of our time in this game on the co-op, whether it was me and you or me, you, and Thacker. I feel like we spent a lot of time. We kind of, I don't want to say we stress tested, but we put it through its paces because most of our hours in the game were co-op. So I think all things considered, it passes the test on every technical scale. And then the gameplay it's third-person cover shooter, not really cover shooter, but just third-person shooter. And it's some of the best gameplay, I think, from this genre that we've seen in a long time, probably since Gears 5. Or whatever the last Gears of War game, Gears 4, Gears 5, I know is one of those. I've not played any of the Gears of War games, but I know that the last game that came out for that series was very highly regarded. It feels like this is some of the best gameplay in this genre since that last Gears of War game. So that says a lot, considering this is a genre that I think this is a genre that it's interesting that we don't see a lot of games in this type of mold. We don't really see this genre a lot nowadays. It really does feel like it's primarily Gears of War, and then whenever there's a Warhammer game that comes out that's in this format. That's the thing that's so interesting is Warhammer has been so many different kinds of games that for it to seamlessly turn into this kind of game from the first one to this, it really is impressive. And like you said, I just got done saying, Kyle, it's gameplay that's fun, it's addictive, and it's something that you can lose yourself in for a while because I feel like it maximizes the time you're in the game. The missions aren't overly long, but they're not that short either.
Right, and I also like that, say if you have to quit in the middle of a mission, it lets you pick right back up where you were. You don't have to go back to the hub area, restart the mission, all that. It just lets you pick right back up, even if you're in co-op, not in co-op. Also, the multiplayer. The multiplayer wasn't bad either. It's now I played a little bit of it, and I will say that I don't think it's really for me. Um, but what I did play of it though, I thought that it was fun, and I was like, I could definitely see myself playing this with a bunch of my friends, just goofing off, not really taking it that serious. I mean, there are probably people who are going to take it very competitively, but that's just not me. Now
Yeah,
I don't know. I don't play a lot of multiplayer games nowadays, other than the finals. So including multiplayer, I think was just like a neat little bonus. But for me, I was more interested in the story mode and in the co-op because I'd rather play, with my friends than, playing against a team that probably has the meta figured out and is going to just wipe me every time. Um, but yeah, dude, I gotta say, for my first Warhammer game, I'm really impressed. I think that
I
this
think
is.
the other,
Sorry, go ahead.
yeah. No, well, I was going to say, I think the other thing that's really impressive, and this goes kind of back to the technical side of it, is there's a lot of stuff happening on screen at one time, and yet it feels like the frame rate's pretty steady the whole time, and that's a big plus.
Oh yes, dude, and that's another benefit of this being a current gen exclusive, and not being on PS4 or Xbox, One or whatever the last one up. Was it Xbox One?
Yeah, it was Xbox One.
Damn, dude. But yeah,
You're getting old, I know.
it's a benefit of it being a current gen exclusive because there is a lot constantly happening, especially when you're in co-op. You have two different people who are doing shit, and they've got these Doom kind of takedowns that you can do. I'm impressed that that shit doesn't break the game when you have three different people all doing their own thing while you have just hundreds of enemies on screen at once. It really shows, we need more games on current gen. Stop with the last gen shit. But yeah, like I think that this game for Warhammer fans especially is a massive hit. I've seen a lot of people who are into the Warhammer games who have said that, this is like one of the best ones that they've played. And again, it makes me wish that I had played the first game. Now, I don't know when the first one came out or if it was even, like within the last 5 years, but man, I wish I had played it because if it had come out around the same time as, like the Xbox 360 when Gears of War was really big, dude, I absolutely would have loved it and probably would have tried out other Warhammer games like Vermintide, which I think is a first-person shooter. But, yeah.
Well, I think also, I think that the co-op is such a big part of this game that I would say that unless you're a big Warhammer fan, you probably won't love playing this game solo. It definitely feels like it's a game that is more designed to play with friends and to co-op and kind of run through the story. It feels in that vein similar to the Borderlands games. The Borderlands games are a lot of fun solo, and if you love the games, you'll love them solo. But if you find yourself wanting to try them, they're a lot more fun when you have people to play with because, again, it gets wacky and chaotic and fun, even more fun that way, more so than it already is. You mentioned the takedowns, and I'm glad you did because that kind of transitioned into something in the gameplay I loved, which was the takedowns. I think the most impressive part, and we talked about this a lot when we were playing, it's not just one set takedown for each enemy. It feels like there are a ton of different animations, and it's very clear that a
Yes.
lot of care was put into that. And I love that because it showed that okay, they weren't comfortable, they weren't satisfied just putting one cool looking takedown in the game that would get old looking at after the eighth time you do it. I felt like we got hours into the game, and I was still seeing new takedowns that I hadn't seen yet.
Yeah, that's one thing is like if they had just reused the same animation over and over, it would have been lazy as shit. And like with everything they had already done, I feel like there was an easy excuse for them to do that, and the fact that they didn't, it makes me appreciate it more. And
100%.
and like you were saying, like they were like we were running into new enemies all the time, and I was like, okay, the first thing I want to see is what happens when you do a takedown on them because I wanted to see all the different animations for it. I really, really enjoy the fact that there are constant weapon drops just throughout the
Yes.
maps. You don't have to just rely on the weapon you took into the mission. You can find weapons all throughout the map and, like constantly change out your gear. So It's not like, you get screwed, you take in a weapon, and it ends up being really bad against the enemies that you're fighting. Chances are there are, 3 or 4 different weapons that'll be around for you to pick up, which is very, very appreciated.
I think that's another real strength is this game almost encourages experimentation. Obviously you've got the different classes that you can pick and they all play drastically different. You've got your tank one, you've got your long range, you've got your one that's your class that specializes in mid range, you've got your one that specializes in melee, which we'll talk about the melee combat because it is just as satisfying as the gunplay in this game is. I think the melee combat, to a point, there are moments I thought where it almost outshined the gunplay, and the gunplay is some of the best, again, that we've seen in this genre. But there were times in missions where I would start with one loadout and say, okay, I'm going to stick with this, I'm going to get really good with this, and then we'll go from there. And then a few minutes into the mission, I would have completely ditched that setup for something new, and I would have loved it. Whether it was a new sidearm, a new two-handed gun, a new melee weapon, it felt like, okay, I've got a couple different ways I can play this, and I loved that. I love that the game didn't try to pigeonhole you in just because of that class. I think that it's very easy for games like this to, again, you pick a class, and it wants you to play a certain way. And to an extent, this game wants you to play a certain way when it comes to the classes, but at the same time, it didn't restrict you from using other weapons or using different ways of attacking like it could have. So, Kyle, I know you love the melee just as much as I did. I mean, dude, there were times where we would go minutes and minutes on it, at a time without even firing a bullet, just because we were having fun just beating enemies to death with whatever melee weapons we could find.
Yeah, dude, the chainsword is epic as shit, dude. Like, I gotta say, the melee combat in the third person shooter, for it to be actually, just as satisfying, and like you said, even sometimes might outshine the gunplay, that's impressive. Because in third person shooter games, usually the only melee combat you really get is just click the right stick to hit them, with your gun or something. They give you whole melee weapons, and they've got combos and shit you can do, and then even, if you stun them, you pull out your gun, you can get, a critical shot on them. Dude, I realistically could see somebody going through this entire game, full melee. Honestly, it might be a fun challenge to do.
Honestly, it might possibly be, and this is the kind of game I could see somebody playing through this game several times, in different ways, each playthrough, playing each different class, like you said, doing melee only, doing a sidearm only challenge. I feel like there are so many different ways to play this game, and again, they all feel viable. That's the key. Is that I don't think at any point I picked up a weapon where I wasn't like, okay, I could at least see myself using this if I can figure out how to use it, because it felt like, again, everything that we tried using, it felt like to some extent it was useful. To some extent, it was good. There was a use that it had that made it worth using. And then the ultimate attacks were awesome as well. I remember we joked about the one that I was using on mine, where it was basically just a God of War Rage Out attack, where it just kind of dealt a bunch of damage to all the enemies around you. And again, each build having those abilities, it makes each build feel unique, but each ability very much had its strengths and absolutely had its uses, where it made it worth giving each of them a try. As far as critique, and I know this is going to seem like a very fast episode, but to be honest, I mean, we've already, when there's two of us and not three of us, it's very easy for us to burn through these episodes. So if this is a shorter episode, forgive us. It's not that we don't love this game. It's just that we've praised a ton of the stuff in it, and we love, I think we can both say, we love probably 90% of this game. If there's one thing I didn't love, Kyle, and I'll let you go into your critiques a little bit after we address this, I didn't love that progression in the story was kind of just limited to the host. I would have loved to have seen, cross progression between both players' games or all three players' games. There is trophy progression. Which is great. It means that if you do want to play through the game, if you do want to go for the platinum, or you want to try to get all the achievements or whatever, you can absolutely do it in co-op. There will be some things that obviously you have to go into multiplayer to do, but you can absolutely, for the story, get all of the trophies in co-op. You just can't progress the story in your game. And that was kind of a shock back to reality for me, Kyle, was every time I went back to my game and I was right back near the start, it was kind of like a moment of, oh, I am at this part in my game. I haven't really progressed much in my game, because so often I was playing in your game or Thacker's game, But I feel like that's a minor complaint, but it's a complaint nonetheless.
Yeah, it's 2024. I don't understand why we aren't, putting cross progression in games between, co-op players.
Especially when co-op is a big part like this one is.
Yeah, you'd think that, when it's heavily advertised, hey, this game is co-op, when you can have two different people. I mean, like, think about this. If you want to play this whole game and you all want to go for the platinum because you're really big Warhammer fans, you're gonna have to end up playing through the story 3 different times on everybody's, different account. Like, that's a lot, just to play co-op, just to play with your friends. And then it's like, okay, well, if we just help one person, then it's like, all right, well, thanks. Now both of you got to go do it on your own. It doesn't make it as fun trying to replay the game, you know. But yeah, that's really my only thing too, is that it's it's just not an excuse anymore to still have games where co-op is heavily advertised and you don't have cross progression.
Yeah, I think that again, talking about negatives, that was probably my only negative. Again, I mentioned I did have the game crash on me one time while playing with Thacker on his stream, but outside of that, I didn't really experience any technical issues. I know you said you didn't experience really any real technical issues. The game again is a really really good game. It's one of those games that I would say that there's two things I would say about it. One, we talk all the time about if this game came out in a normal year and not a down year like this year has been for gaming, which it's okay to admit this year has been a down year for gaming. There have been some bangers in there. Rebirth, Astrobot, Helldivers 2 was obviously very successful, and we still got some really good games that have come out. Legend of Zelda Echoes of Wisdom, which we've been playing, and we're going to review that next week. There have been some really good games that have come out, but it has been a down year. Even in a normal year, I feel like this game would be right there in the Game of the Year conversation. I feel like there's a lot of people that love this game, and I think that for all the things it does well, this to me, Kyle, is still a game that I would consider in the Game of the Year conversation, even if this was, say, 2 years ago in 2022.
Yeah, I honestly, I saw a lot of people talking about how this might be, and it was probably because they're Warhammer fans, and, I get it, because this is a really damn good game, so for Warhammer fans, this is probably like a 10 out of 10 for them. But yeah, I think that this has potential, for Game of the Year in other years where, I mean, even this year I've seen people talking about it. For me personally, I don't think it's going to be in my Game of the Year discussion. Like, I love the game, but, I don't think it's going to be in mine. But
Yeah.
I can see the argument for some people, who maybe haven't played all the same games that we have. We have played pretty much every single major release this year. So that being said, it's very hard for me to say, well, out of everything I've played this year, Warhammer is going to be in Game of the Year, because there are some games that I think have just been a little bit better. But yeah, dude, I agree. I think that this definitely has conversation, at least, for Game of the Year in years like this year where it's been kind of, lackluster.
I think that if you told me in December that this game won Game of the Year, I think I'd be okay with it. I think that's ultimately the way I've described it to people is if you told me that this game was an end Game of the Year, I would learn to be okay with that just because, in previous years we've had, last year it was Baldur's Gate, year before it was, it was Elden Ring, and it felt like we've seen great games after great games in both of those years, when we could name off, obviously, every game we played last year, every game we played the year before. It feels like we played a lot of great games. This one is right up there for me. I think it's a phenomenal game. I think that if you are looking to jump into the Warhammer franchise for the first time, I think it's a great starting point because, again, not having to know where everyone's at in the story or who characters are, you can more or less kind of pick up on the story and go from there. And I think that's a major plus to everything this game already does well. So, Warhammer 40,000, Space Marines 2, certainly a great game, and certainly a game I think, Kyle, that we both agree will likely make an appearance in the Side Mission Top 10 episode at the end of the year around Christmas time. So, that is going to do it for this episode of Side Mission. Be sure to follow us on Twitter at Side Mission Pod. You can check us out on Facebook as well at Side Mission Podcast. For Kyle, I'm Rusty. Thanks for listening.